When the dust settled on that frozen Belgian battlefield in January 1945, First Sergeant Leonard Funk stood surrounded by bodies. 21 enemy soldiers lay dead, 24 more wounded. The only thing standing between him and certain death moments earlier had been 10 pounds of American steel and walnut, spitting 600 rounds of fury every minute. His Thompson submachine gun had just turned what should have been a massacre into a Medal of Honor. But this wasn't just one soldier's story. This was the story of the weapon that made German and Japanese forces think twice before engaging American troops in close quarters. The gun that veterans would later say changed the tides of war. This is the story of why the Thompson submachine gun, once rejected by the very army it was designed to save, became the weapon that terrified the Axis powers and helped win World War II. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, hit that like button, drop a comment below telling me what World War II topic you want covered next, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this. The year was 1917, and the Western Front had become a graveyard. Trench warfare had created a nightmare scenario where brave men charged across open ground only to be cut down by machine gun fire, where battles raged for months over mere yards of mud-soaked earth. Brigadier General John Taliaferro Thompson, a career Army ordnance officer who'd spent his life around weapons, knew that something had to change. The bolt-action rifles stretching over 5 feet long, with bayonets attached, were too cumbersome for the brutal hand-to-hand fighting in the trenches. What the infantry needed, Thompson concluded, was what he called a trench broom, something that could sweep the enemy from their fortified positions with overwhelming firepower at close range. Thompson wasn't starting from scratch. The Germans had already fielded the Bergmann MP-18 in 1918, the world's first true submachine gun. But Thompson had a vision for something different, something uniquely American. He wanted a weapon that an individual soldier could carry and operate, that could fire 50 to 100 rounds without reloading, light enough that a man could crawl with it through mud and blood from trench to trench. This is where fate intervened. Thompson's chief engineer, Theodore Eickhoff, made a suggestion that would change warfare forever. Instead of developing yet another rifle-caliber weapon, why not build around the Army's standard pistol ammunition, the .45 ACP cartridge? This was the same powerful round used in the M1911 pistol that had earned a fearsome reputation for stopping power. If they could make a fully automatic weapon that fired this devastating cartridge, they'd have something unprecedented. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. John Bell Blish, a naval officer, had patented a friction-delayed blowback system in 1915. Thompson and his team at the Auto Ordnance Corporation incorporated this Blish lock mechanism into their design. The theory was elegant. At the moment of firing, when chamber pressure peaked, the carefully angled surfaces of the H-shaped locking piece would create enough friction to keep the bolt closed. As pressure dropped, the friction decreased, allowing the bolt to unlock and cycle the next round. This wasn't just mechanical ingenuity, it was warfare engineering at its finest. The weapon they created weighed just over 10 pounds empty, a hefty piece of equipment but manageable for an infantryman. The .45 ACP round it fired delivered tremendous stopping power at close range. The gun could be fed from 20 or 30 round box magazines, or, in later models, from 50 or even 100 round drum magazines that became its iconic signature. The rate of fire in early models reached 800 rounds per minute, enough to absolutely devastate anyone unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end. But here's where the story takes its first bitter turn. By the time auto ordnance had working prototypes in 1919, World War I had ended. The war to end all wars was over, and suddenly nobody wanted to buy weapons. Thompson's company contracted with Colt to manufacture 15,000 of these revolutionary submachine guns, officially designated the Model 1921. These weren't cheap firearms. Each one cost $200 in 1920s money. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $3,000 in today's currency. For context, you could buy a brand new Ford Model T for less than half that price. The US military, flush with surplus weapons from the war and facing severe budget cuts, showed absolutely no interest. The Army actually tested the Thompson in 1928 for potential cavalry use. Their verdict was crushing. They called it an undesirable weapon, effective only at short range, unnecessary, and undesirable for cavalry service. Recommended action, don't adopt it. Period. Desperate for buyers, Auto Ordnance tried marketing to civilians, to police departments, to anyone who would listen. The weapon's actual combat effectiveness? Untested and unknown. But America was about to discover the Thompson's capabilities in the worst possible way. January 25, 1925, marked one of the first recorded uses of the Thompson in violence. During a coal mining dispute in West Virginia, both law enforcement and striking miners fired Thompson submachine guns at each other. The weapon's effectiveness became immediately horrifyingly clear, but that was just the opening act. When Prohibition became law in 1920, America's criminal underworld exploded. Bootleggers needed firepower to protect their territory and their shipments. The Thompson submachine gun, rejected by the military, suddenly found eager buyers among gangsters and bank robbers. Its price tag of $200 was pocket change for successful criminals making fortunes in illegal liquor. The Thompson's most infamous moment came on Valentine's Day, 1929. 7 members of the North Side Gang were lined up against a Chicago garage wall. Men dressed as police officers walked in carrying Thompson submachine guns with drum magazines. What happened next took less than a minute. The Thompson's .45 caliber rounds, fired at close range from full automatic weapons, essentially executed all 7 men where they stood. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, as it became known, splashed the Thompson across every newspaper in America. It got a nickname that stuck, the Chicago typewriter, for the distinctive sound it made when fired. They also called it the Chicago piano, the chopper, and the street sweeper. John Dillinger carried one during bank robberies. George Babyface Nelson used one in multiple shootouts with federal agents. Bonnie and Clyde were photographed with Thompsons. The weapon had become the symbol of American organized crime. But here's the critical irony of the Thompson's gangster years. While criminals were proving just how devastatingly effective the weapon could be at close range, the U.S. military was still uninterested. They had warehouses full of Springfield rifles and Browning machine guns. Why spend money on something new? It took law enforcement to recognize the Thompson's legitimate tactical value. After the Kansas City Massacre in 1933, Ferry 3, where 4 law enforcement officers were killed in an attempted prisoner rescue, the FBI acquired Thompson submachine guns. J. Edgar Hoover's G-men began carrying the same weapon as the criminals they hunted. If gangsters respected anything, it was superior firepower. Now the good guys had it too. The U.S. Marines were the first American military service to truly embrace the Thompson. Starting in 1926, Marines used them to guard mail trains that were being repeatedly targeted by armed robbers. They proved so effective that the Marines took their Thompsons with them to hotspots around the globe. In Nicaragua, during the late 1920s, Marines fighting insurgents found the Thompson perfect for jungle combat. In China during the 1930s, Marines stationed at embassies carried Thompsons for close protection. These weren't just ceremonial weapons. They were combat proven by American forces in actual firefights. In 1928, the Navy Bureau of Ordnance made modifications to the Colt Model 1921 Thompsons that Marines were using. They reduced the rate of fire to 600 rounds per minute for better controllability and added a compensator to the barrel to reduce muzzle climb during automatic fire. They stamped these modified guns U.S. Navy model of 1928. The Marine Corps had discovered something the Army would take years to learn. In close quarters combat, whether clearing buildings or fighting in dense jungle, the Thompson submachine gun was unmatched. Its .45 caliber rounds had shocking stopping power. A man hit by rifle fire might keep fighting. A man hit by a Thompson burst at close range went down and stayed down. By 1938, the gathering storm clouds over Europe finally convinced the U.S. Army to reconsider. They formally adopted the Thompson submachine gun, designating it the M1928A1. But production was limited and expensive. Each Thompson required extensive machining, skilled craftsmen, and quality materials. As war erupted in Europe in 1939, suddenly everyone wanted Thompsons. The British government, facing Nazi Germany's war machine with inadequate armaments, placed orders for these weapons they'd once dismissed as gangster guns. France ordered them. Sweden ordered them. By the end of 1940, orders for over 318,000 Thompson submachine guns had been placed. This created a crisis. Auto Ordnance's limited facilities couldn't meet demand. They built their own factory in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They licensed Savage Arms Company to manufacture Thompsons. Production ramped up dramatically, but the complexity and cost of each weapon remained problematic. A Thompson cost approximately $200 to produce, while Germany's MP-40 submachine gun cost a fraction of that thanks to stamped metal construction. Then came December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor changed everything. America needed weapons immediately, and they needed them in massive quantities. The Thompson, despite its cost, was the only submachine gun in American inventory. Production accelerated to unprecedented levels. By early 1942, 500,000 Thompsons had been manufactured, but engineers were already working on simplifications to speed production and reduce costs. The M1 Thompson, adopted in April 1942, eliminated the complex Blish locking system and replaced it with simple blowback operation. The elaborate cuts compensator was removed. The cooling fins on the barrel were eliminated. The charging handle moved from the top to the right side of the receiver. These changes dropped the cost from $200 to about $70 per unit. The M1A1, standardized in October 1942, simplified things even further. It eliminated the separate firing pin and hammer, machining the firing pin directly onto the bolt face. Production time was cut in half. Cost dropped to $45 per weapon, including accessories and spare parts. Most importantly, reliability actually improved. The simpler mechanism had fewer parts to break or malfunction. August 7, 1942 marked the Thompson's first major American combat test. 11,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The M1928A1 Thompson submachine guns came ashore with them, along with less reliable Rising submachine guns. What followed was 6 months of brutal jungle warfare that would validate everything the Thompson supporters had claimed and expose some limitations nobody had anticipated. The thick jungle vegetation of Guadalcanal created a combat environment unlike anything American forces had experienced. Visibility was measured in feet, not yards. Firefights erupted at ranges where the Thompson's short effective range of 50 yards wasn't a limitation, but an advantage. Japanese forces, typically armed with bolt-action Arisaka rifles, found themselves at a severe disadvantage when American Marines with Thompsons attacked their positions. The psychological impact of the Thompson's distinctive sound cannot be overstated. When that gun opened up, when you heard that rapid hammering of .45 caliber rounds ripping through the jungle, you knew American forces were attacking. Japanese soldiers reported the terror of being unable to return effective fire against an enemy wielding such overwhelming automatic weapons. But Guadalcanal also exposed the Thompson's weaknesses. The .45 ACP round, devastating against flesh and bone, couldn't penetrate dense jungle undergrowth. Small diameter trees and thick vegetation that .30-06 rifle rounds would punch through stopped .35 caliber pistol ammunition cold. Marines found themselves in situations where they could see enemy soldiers behind vegetation, but their Thompson rounds wouldn't reach them. Weight became another issue. At nearly 11 pounds empty, fully loaded Thompsons approached 12 pounds. Add the humid heat, the constant patrols, the physical demands of jungle warfare, and that weight became exhausting. Some Marines reportedly discarded their Thompsons in frustration, but many more prized them above everything else. Marine Raiders, the elite shock troops conducting deep penetration missions, loved the Thompson's reliability. The weapon functioned in conditions that jammed other guns. Rain, mud, sand, saltwater spray. The Thompson kept working. Its rugged construction and loose tolerances meant it could take abuse that would disable more delicate weapons. One documented incident tells the story perfectly. A Thompson was found on the beachhead at Anzio, Italy, in the hands of a dead British soldier. In front of his position lay the bodies of 19 German soldiers he'd killed before dying. 19 confirmed kills with a Thompson submachine gun. That's not just firepower, that's a force multiplier. The .45 ACP cartridge's stopping power became legendary among troops who carried the Thompson. And an American paratrooper who fought in Europe later wrote that he could tell from experience that 3 rounds from a Thompson lifted a large man about 6 inches off the ground and dropped him 2 feet from where he was hit. Whether hit with one burst or multiple rounds, men shot with Thompsons went nowhere. They went down hard. Compare this to the German MP-40, which fired the 9mm parabellum round. While the MP-40 was lighter, easier to manufacture, and had better range, Its 9mm rounds lacked the Thompson's shocking stopping power. American troops who captured MP-40s often reported that enemies hit with 9mm fire might stay in the fight. Nobody hit with 45 ACP from a Thompson kept fighting. This created a profound psychological effect on Axis forces. German and Japanese troops learned that Americans with Thompson submachine guns were extraordinarily dangerous in close quarters. The smart move, if you heard that distinctive sound of a Thompson firing, was either to surrender immediately or retreat rapidly. Standing and fighting against Thompson-armed troops in buildings, bunkers, or trenches was nearly suicidal. As American forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, the Thompson found itself increasingly concentrated in the hands of elite units. The 82nd Airborne Division and 101st Airborne Division paratroopers carried Thompsons in significant numbers. These men would jump behind enemy lines, where close-quarters combat was virtually guaranteed. The Thompson's overwhelming firepower could compensate for being outnumbered. The 2nd and 5th Ranger battalions were heavily equipped with Thompsons. Rangers specialized in raids, lightning strikes, and assaults on fortified positions. The Thompson was ideal for this work. British commandos, conducting cross-channel raids even before the main invasion, carried so many Thompsons that they incorporated a stylized Tommy gun into their insignia. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Paratroopers of the 101st and 2nd Airborne dropped into Normandy in the pre-dawn darkness, many carrying M1 or M1A1 Thompsons. Rangers scaling the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc carried Thompsons. Infantry hitting the beaches carried them. The Thompson was there for the entire operation. The fighting in Normandy's hedgerows proved perfect Thompson territory. These ancient earthen walls, topped with thick vegetation, created countless small enclosures. Combat devolved into savage close-range firefights, where visibility was measured in yards and battles were won by whoever could bring overwhelming firepower to bear first. American troops developed sophisticated small unit tactics that maximized each weapon's strengths. M1 Garand riflemen would take point, engaging enemy forces at longer ranges. Thompson gunners would be positioned behind them, ready to deliver devastating close-range fire. Additional riflemen would follow, with an M1 carbine at the rear. This layered approach meant American squads had appropriate firepower at every range. The Thompson excelled in house-to-house fighting. When clearing a building, you wanted that Thompson up front. Its rate of fire meant you could sweep a room with bullets before defenders could effectively respond. Its 45 caliber rounds punched through interior walls that might stop 9mm rounds. Urban combat in places like Carentan and later in Germany itself validated the Thompson again and again. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1904 put incredible pressure on American forces. Hitler's last major offensive in the West crashed into Allied lines with overwhelming force, creating desperate situations where elite troops had to hold against superior numbers. The 2nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, rushed to Belgium to stop the German breakthrough, relied heavily on their Thompsons. First Sergeant Leonard Funk's incredible action on January 29, 1945, demonstrates the Thompson's combat effectiveness under the worst possible circumstances. Funk had led his makeshift headquarters platoon of clerks and support personnel in capturing 30 German prisoners during fighting near Holzheim, Belgium. He left them under guard while he went back for more men. But a superior German force overwhelmed the guards, rearmed the prisoners, and when Funk returned, he found himself facing a German officer with a pistol and approximately 100 enemy soldiers. The Wehrmacht officer ordered Funk to surrender. Funk pretended to comply, then whipped his M1A1 Thompson into firing position. He emptied his entire 30-round magazine into the German officer before the enemy could react. While German soldiers scrambled for weapons, Funk reloaded and continued firing as his American soldiers grabbed whatever arms they could find. When it ended, 21 Germans were dead, 24 wounded. Funk and his men had turned a massacre into a victory through superior firepower and audacity. For this action, he received the Medal of Honor. The Pacific Theater presented different challenges but similar opportunities for the Thompson. Marines conducting island-hopping campaigns from Tarawa to Okinawa carried Thompsons throughout the war. In the dense jungles of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and other islands, combat often occurred at ranges where the Thompson dominated. The Japanese developed a healthy respect for American forces armed with Thompson submachine guns. Captured Japanese troops reported that the sound of Thompson's firing struck terror into their ranks. They knew American Marines or soldiers with these weapons were extraordinarily deadly in the thick jungle vegetation where much Pacific combat occurred. Tarawa in November 1943 saw brutal close-quarters fighting where the Thompson proved invaluable. Marines had to clear Japanese fortified positions bunker by bunker, pillbox by pillbox. The Thompson's ability to deliver massive volumes of .45 caliber fire at point-blank range made it the weapon of choice for these assaults. Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945 continued this pattern. When Marines had to clear cave complexes and fortified positions, the Thompson was often the first weapon through the door. The statistics of Thompson production tell their own story. Approximately 1.7 million Thompson submachine guns were manufactured during World War II. Of these, 1,387,134 were the simplified M1 and M1A1 variants. Over 137,000 Thompsons were shipped to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Tens of thousands went to British forces, Chinese nationalist armies fighting Japan, and various other Allied forces. The weapon had gone from being rejected by the US military to being produced in quantities that rival armies of the era could only dream of. But the Thompson's dominance was already being challenged. By 1943, the M3 submachine gun, nicknamed the grease gun for its resemblance to a mechanic's tool, entered production. Made primarily from stamped sheet metal, the M3 cost only $20.94 to produce, less than half the cost of even the simplified M1A1 Thompson. It weighed just over 8 pounds, significantly lighter than the Thompson. The M3's slower rate of fire of 400 rounds per minute made it easier to control. It used the same 45 ACP ammunition, ensuring similar stopping power. Yet despite the M3's advantages in cost and weight, the Thompson remained in frontline service throughout the war. Marines especially resisted giving up their Thompsons. When new M3 submachine guns were issued, many Marines simply refused to turn in their battered but faithful Thompsons. They'd been through hell with these weapons. The Thompson had saved their lives repeatedly. Some unscrupulous Marines reportedly bought or stole Thompsons from tank crews who were being issued M3s. The bond between fighting men and their weapons is something that transcends logic. The Thompson had earned a loyalty that couldn't be measured in production costs or weight specifications. Combat veterans knew that when everything went wrong, when the enemy was close and death was seconds away, the Thompson wouldn't fail them. That reliability, that certainty, was worth more than any marginal improvement in specifications. The Thompson's effectiveness in combat was confirmed by the enemy's own actions. German forces frequently picked up captured Thompsons and used them in preference to their own MP-40 submachine guns. Japanese forces who captured Thompsons, when Hong Kong and Malaysia fell, used them as limited standard weapons. The Italian military, before Italy's surrender, used captured Thompsons. When your enemy adopts your weapon in preference to their own, that's the ultimate validation. German Fallschirmjäger, elite paratroopers, were photographed in Tunisia with captured M1928A1 Thompsons. These were crack troops with access to the best German weapons, yet they chose to carry and use American Thompsons. The conclusion is inescapable. The Thompson submachine gun was recognized across all sides as an exceptionally effective close-quarters combat weapon. Europe saw the Thompson excel in urban warfare. The fighting through Italian cities like Cassino and Rome, the liberation of Paris, the brutal house-to-house combat in German cities, all of this favored the Thompson's strengths. British and Canadian commandos made the Thompson their signature weapon. American Rangers and paratroopers carried them throughout the European campaign. Tank crews kept Thompsons in their vehicles for close protection. The Thompson became as much a symbol of American forces as the M1 Garand rifle. When victory finally came in Europe in May 1945, and then in the Pacific in August 1945, over 1 million American servicemen had carried Thompson submachine guns into battle. They had used them in every theater of war, from the frozen forests of the Bulge to the steaming jungles of the Pacific, from the mountains of Italy to the beaches of Normandy. The weapon that the Army had rejected in 1928 had helped win the largest war in human history. The Thompson story doesn't end with World War II, though that's where its greatest legacy was written. The weapon continued in service through the Korean War, though by then newer designs were replacing it. Vietnam saw some Thompsons in the early years of American involvement, cherished weapons lovingly passed from one soldier to another like heirlooms. Even in the 21st century, occasional reports surface of Thompson submachine guns, still in use by military or police forces in far-flung corners of the world. The weapon's cultural impact eclipsed even its military significance. The Thompson became perhaps the most recognizable firearm in cinema and popular culture. Every gangster movie, every World War II film, they featured the distinctive profile of the Tommy gun. It represented American power, American ingenuity, and American determination to win at any cost. For the generation that fought World War II, the Thompson represented something more personal. It was the weapon that had been there in their darkest hours. When they had stormed ashore on hostile beaches, when they'd parachuted behind enemy lines, when they'd cleared bunkers and buildings knowing death waited around every corner, the Thompson had been in their hands. Its weight was reassuring, its sound was distinctive, its reliability was absolute, and its stopping power was devastating. Veterans would spend the rest of their lives telling stories about their Thompsons, about the time it jammed once in 5 years of combat, about the enemy soldier who took 3 rounds and went down like he'd been hit by a truck, about the distinctive chatter that told everyone within earshot that Americans were in the fight. The Thompson submachine gun earned its place in history, not through marketing or propaganda, but through performance under the worst conditions imaginable. The weapon's impact on military thinking cannot be overstated. The Thompson proved that individual soldiers equipped with automatic weapons could defeat larger forces equipped with conventional rifles. It demonstrated that close-quarters combat was a critical battlefield environment that required specialized weapons. It showed that stopping power and reliability often mattered more than range or ammunition capacity. These lessons influenced weapon development for generations. Modern assault rifles, submachine guns, and personal defense weapons all trace their conceptual lineage back to the Thompson. The idea of giving every soldier automatic firepower, now considered basic military doctrine, was revolutionary when the Thompson first proved it possible. The weapon helped establish the United States as the premier small arms innovator of the 20th century. It showed American industry's ability to go from peacetime production to wartime output on an unprecedented scale. It proved that American design philosophy, emphasizing reliability and effectiveness over cost and complexity, could produce weapons that soldiers trusted with their lives. For Germany and Japan, the Thompson represented a significant tactical problem. Their forces, largely equipped with bolt-action rifles and limited numbers of automatic weapons, found themselves at a severe disadvantage when facing American troops in close combat. The Germans responded by issuing more MP-40s and later by developing the revolutionary Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle. The Japanese, lacking the industrial capacity to respond adequately, simply suffered heavier casualties in close quarters fighting throughout the war. The Thompson didn't just kill enemy soldiers, it forced enemy militaries to rethink their entire approach to infantry weapons. That's strategic impact on a scale most weapons never achieve. The psychological effect of the Thompson extended beyond the immediate sound and fury of combat. Axis troops learned that certain American units, particularly airborne forces, Rangers, and Marines, were heavily equipped with these weapons. Engaging these units meant facing overwhelming automatic fire at close range. This knowledge affected enemy decision-making, sometimes causing retreats or surrenders that might not have occurred against forces with conventional weapons. But for all its successes, the Thompson had real limitations that honest assessment requires acknowledging. At nearly 11 pounds, it was heavy. Soldiers carrying them for extended periods suffered fatigue. The 45 ACP ammunition, while devastatingly effective against personnel, couldn't penetrate light cover that rifle rounds would punch through. In jungle environments, this was a significant tactical limitation. The weapon's effective range of 50 yards, while sufficient for close quarters combat, left Thompson armed troops vulnerable to enemy riflemen at longer ranges. Smart tactics paired Thompson gunners with riflemen to cover all engagement ranges. The cost and complexity of production, even after simplification, meant that Thompsons could never be issued to every soldier who wanted one. Many combat veterans never carried a Thompson simply because there weren't enough to go around. The drum magazines, so iconic in gangster films and early war photos, proved too heavy and noisy for practical combat use. The 50-round drum weighed over 4 pounds when loaded and rattled when soldiers moved, giving away positions. Most combat troops used the 20 or 30-round stick magazines despite lower capacity. Yet despite these limitations, combat veterans consistently rate the Thompson among the finest combat weapons of World War II. Survey after survey, interview after interview, soldiers who carried Thompsons into battle speak of them with respect, bordering on reverence. They acknowledge the weight, the limited range, the cost. Then they say they wouldn't have wanted any other weapon when fighting for their lives at close quarters. That's the ultimate judgment. Not from engineers or procurement officers or historians, but from the men who carried these weapons in combat. The Thompson submachine gun had turned the Chicago typewriter into the most feared close-quarters weapon on multiple battlefields across the globe. It had proven that American engineering and manufacturing could produce weapons that enemy forces respected and feared. The question posed at the beginning remains worth considering. Did the Thompson submachine gun terrify the Axis and change the tides of war? Terrify might be strong language for professional soldiers, but there's documented evidence that German and Japanese forces developed healthy respect for American troops armed with Thompsons. They knew engagement at close quarters with these weapons was extraordinarily dangerous. They knew the .45 caliber rounds hit with shocking force. They knew American forces equipped with Thompsons were likely elite troops. That knowledge affected tactical decisions throughout the war. Did it change the tides? No single weapon wins wars, but the Thompson gave American forces a significant tactical advantage in the close-quarters combat that dominated much of World War II fighting. It helped Marines Island hop across the Pacific, paratroopers seize and hold key objectives in Europe, Rangers storm fortified positions, and infantry clear countless buildings and bunkers. Each of these actions contributed to Allied victory. Each relied heavily on soldiers armed with Thompson submachine guns. The weapon's legacy extends far beyond World War II. In collectors' markets today, original military Thompsons in good condition sell for $25,000 to $45,000. Semi-automatic civilian versions remain popular with shooting enthusiasts. Museums around the world display Thompsons as centerpieces of their World War II collections. But the real legacy lives in the memories of veterans and in the historical record of what these weapons accomplished. The Thompson represents a uniquely American journey. Born from one war's brutal lessons, rejected by the military it was designed to serve, adopted by criminals who revealed its deadly effectiveness, finally embraced by the armed forces when global conflict demanded the best weapons available. It served through the greatest war in human history with distinction, saving countless American lives through its reliability and devastating firepower. It became a symbol recognized worldwide, an icon of American power and determination. Not bad for a weapon once dismissed as undesirable and unnecessary. For the young men who carried Thompsons ashore at Guadalcanal in Normandy, who jumped into darkness over Normandy with them slung across their chests, who cleared Japanese bunkers and German pillboxes with them, the Thompson was more than a weapon. It was a trusted companion that had seen them through hell and brought them home alive. That's the measure of any combat weapon, not its specifications or its production numbers or its place in military history, but whether the men who carried it into battle trusted it with their lives, and whether it proved worthy of that trust. The Thompson submachine gun was worthy. The hundreds of thousands of American veterans who came home from World War II are testimony to that fact. The enemy soldiers who faced these weapons and learned to fear their distinctive sound are testament to it. The Medal of Honor recipients whose citations mention using Thompson submachine guns to defeat overwhelming enemy forces are testament to it. This weapon that started life as John Thompson's vision of a trench broom had become something far greater. It had become the Chicago typewriter that wrote America's victory across battlefields spanning the globe, one .45 caliber round at a time.